Chapter 46. Help for Troubled Minds. Nervous problems are more common than all other illnesses combined. They affect people of every age and race, and there seems to be no end to the number of those who are sick because of anxiety, nervous tension, or emotional stress. Nor are the so-called nervous people the only ones affected. Many others with heart disease, high blood pressure, arthritis, and other types of illness are also under great stress and strain because of their physical condition. Need we wonder why tranquilizers are so widely used today? Common illnesses of the mind. Nervous disorders can be roughly divided into two main classes or groups: those arising from neurotic problems, and those related to psychotic or disturbed personalities. People with neurotic problems are more or less normal in their reactions. They may be over-anxious, or perhaps saddened or depressed, but in their darkest moments they are always in touch with reality. In other words, they are not so different from the rest of us, except that under the pressures of living they tend to go to extremes. As we think of them, we might even begin to recognize some of our own peculiarities and those of our friends. Neurotic personalities. Among these neurotic personalities are chain smokers, alcoholics, drug addicts, people contemplating suicide, and all those anxious, fussy people who are never quite satisfied with life. They also include almost all ulcer patients, as well as the majority of those suffering from high blood pressure. People who are abnormally fat or thin may also belong to the neurotic group. Because of their nervous tensions, they either eat too much or too little. Sleepwalkers, insomniacs, obsessive-compulsive people, cynics, chronic scoffers. 510 Help for Troubled Minds. Nagging wives, and most of those unfortunate people who are always sick. All of these are emotionally unhealthy in one way or another. Their frustrations and complaints are almost endless. Cicero, the great Roman philosopher, said, "The diseases of the mind are more numerous and more destructive than those of the body." He was right, but often the true situation is not recognized. As a result, many of these unhappy people find themselves wandering from one doctor's office to another, always searching for a solution, or having their appendix, gallbladder, or pelvic organs removed, but never finding that inner peace they so much desire. Sometimes these unfortunate sufferers may actually dream up a few extra symptoms to help them gain sympathy. They worry their friends, their families, their employers, their pastors, their attorneys, and physicians. Every doctor's reception room has its share of these unhappy people. Many of them feel guilty over real or imaginary situations. Others are afraid of heart trouble, high blood pressure, and cancer. They act as if they are being punished for what they did or did not do. These peculiar guilt feelings always seem to stem from early childhood. As these neurotic people grow older, they often tend to exchange one set of symptoms for another, until finally they reach old age. Yet none of this is really necessary. With proper treatment, most of these neurotic problems can be solved. Queer people. That other great group of mental patients, the psychotic personalities, are very different, for these are decidedly abnormal. They are completely out of touch with the world around them. Some of them claim to hear voices, while others hold conversations with people who may be non-existent or long since dead. Their peculiar behavior arises either from a distorted view of life, or perhaps from some derangement of the brain. Some of these queer people believe they are a reincarnation of famous personalities of the past, such as Buddha, Confucius, Cleopatra, or Napoleon. They may even try to assume the mannerisms and dress of the individual they are impersonating. Unlike the neurotic group mentioned above, many of these psychotic people are perfectly happy in their peculiar little world, and most of them are more or less harmless. But a few are decidedly paranoid people. 511. Dangerous. Some of the most dreadful crimes are committed by paranoid people who may outwardly appear quite sane and sensibly. Their thinking is so disordered that they actually believe the whole world is against them. They carry deep grudges and will stop at nothing in their destination to get even with their enemies. Many of them honestly believe their neighbors are planning to harm them, perhaps by shooting so-called death rays through their windows, or poisoning their food or water. In their disordered state of mind they secretly plot to destroy these imaginary enemies by every means at their disposal. They may not always resort to crime, but they will carry on a program of malice and hate which amounts to the same thing. Paranoid people turn up in the most surprising places, even in high government positions at times. They are often very clever people. Some of the most frightful wars have been started by these deluded people, most of whom appear to have a persecution complex from early childhood. Adolf Hitler is an outstanding example of paranoid behavior. He and the other queer people around him not only managed to enslave most of Europe, but also to slaughter at least 6 million Jews, not to mention all of those other untold millions who died as a result of World War II. People with disturbed minds fill the mental wards of every large city hospital today. Some are sick with inherited weaknesses. Others are sick because of the evils brought on by their own folly. Many of these unfortunate people are suffering from syphilis of the brain, a chronic disease that unless properly treated will completely destroy both mind and body. These are the more extreme cases of brain damage. A less severe situation may develop if one of the arteries leading to the brain becomes blocked or narrowed owing to arteriosclerosis or hardening of the arteries. For further details of this, see page 263. There is a brighter side. But the picture is not all bad, there is a brighter side. Many of our most brilliant men and women have passed through great disappointments in life. But instead of becoming depressed they have turned defeat into victory, and have succeeded in creating some of the most remarkable things known to man. For instance, Beethoven. 512 Help for Troubled Minds. Wrote some of his finest music after he was completely deaf. Milton produced his most beautiful poems after he was blind. Many of us would feel hopelessly depressed if we suddenly became deaf or blind, but these men were able to enrich the whole human race in spite of their disabilities. We might even go further and say that without these handicaps they might never have done so well. It all depends on one's attitude of mind. Why are some people able to meet the problems of life successfully while others fall far short of their ideals? To answer this we must first of all understand something about ourselves and why we react the way we do. There are three major factors in the growth of the human mind: heredity, environment, and our own personal response. Heredity is that great mass of inherited tendencies, good or bad, with which we are born. These are more or less fixed and permanent. We can do nothing to change them. But we can always modify these hereditary tendencies if we so desire. Our environment is the world in which we grew up. This too is largely beyond our control, particularly during our earlier years. All our peculiar family customs, our likes and dislikes, our prejudices, all our pleasant and unpleasant memories, and all the deceptions and falsehoods that filled our early years, plus all the good and bad behavior we observed among our relatives, teachers, and friends while we were growing up. In most of this we had no choice. They are all part of our background. But greater than either heredity or environment is our own personal response, or the way we have reacted toward the problems of life. Years ago, before the age of steam, people traveled in sailing ships. The winds were often blowing from the wrong direction. Yet those old sea captains usually managed to keep their ships sailing toward the ports they were trying to reach. They did it by tacking back and forth, and by setting the sails so that the wind would still carry them forward. So it is with ourselves. The storms and stresses of life will either drive us forward or back, depending on how we direct our course. It is so easy to blame others when the real problems usually lie within ourselves. Our own personal response means far more than all the influences that surround us. We are not being blindly driven toward a cruel, inescapable fate. The choice always lies within ourselves. Many of our failures are due to childish reactions that we have carried over into adult life. This is a common cause of mental and physical illness. Often the man who is inwardly afraid will become bold and arrogant to cover his secret fears. Or he may shrink into a helpless state, as if pleading for pity. Both reactions are childish and immature. Even though he is fully grown, his behavior under stress may show that he is regressing to childhood. Most of our mental illnesses arise because the individual cannot cope with the stress and strain of living. It is the parent's responsibility to help each child grow up into full maturity and peace of mind. 514 Help for troubled minds. Most babies are healthy. During any 24-hour period, several thousand perfectly healthy babies are born. Many will no doubt grow up to be good citizens, but some will become desperately unhappy people, largely because of circumstances beyond their control. Among these there will be juvenile delinquents, alcoholics, drug addicts, sex perverts, and many other types of abnormal personalities. These people were not born with any serious physical defects. They became problems in society because of unfortunate situations in their childhood and youth. No one single factor is solely responsible for the development of an abnormal personality. Hereditary tendencies are strong. Environmental effects may be even stronger. How has he reacted to all those unfair things that were said about him in his younger days? Is he morose and full of revenge? If so, he could even be dangerous to others. What is his own personal response? We cannot always blame parents, brothers, sisters, or teachers for a child's failure, even though all of these may play a part. The final choice is always our own, except in frankly psychotic individuals who are discussed at the end of this chapter. The great majority of nervous patients fall within the neurotic or psychoneurotic group. All of them are insecure in one way or another. Some are over-anxious, while others are depressed. A few are both anxious and depressed. We will discuss the anxious group first. Anxious patients. Man has been given a most remarkable memory. He can easily recall events that have happened many years ago, and thus foresee to some extent what is ahead. This often helps him to avoid serious trouble. But this ability to anticipate the future seems to get some people into serious trouble, particularly when they become over-anxious and deeply concerned about the future. Many of these individuals enjoy excellent physical health. Often they are well-built specimens of humanity, perfect in every way. Yet inwardly they may be desperately afraid of their own future. Their troubles are not due to any lack of vitamins, minerals, or proteins, important as these are, but to the fact that they have failed to make the normal adjustments of life. A certain amount of fear is perfectly natural, particularly if one. Anxiety 515. Is in danger of being run down by a speeding train or car. Such concern is a normal, healthy reaction, for without it we might be killed. But anxiety is quite different from this type of fear, for it stems from deep mental conflicts. Usually the one experiencing the conflicts can give no valid reasons for this strong feelings, so he worries about some physical weakness and wonders if he might have a failing heart or some other serious conditions. The same is true of patients with asthma. They seem to do fairly well until they have to face some distressing situations, then almost immediately they will begin wheezing. This is a psychosomatic response to an over-anxious mind. Anxiety is a most unpleasant emotion. The patient usually has deep feelings of apprehension, uneasiness, and even panic. Suddenly he may feel his heart beating rapidly. Next he develops shortness of breath, sweating, or some other peculiar reaction. His blood pressure may begin to rise and his heart to palpitate, and soon he is troubled with real mental anguish and physical distress. It is easy for him to think his symptoms are due to some organic cause within the body, but anxiety or hidden fear is the true cause of his trouble. There is no question that such people are sick, but their illness is usually due to some underlying emotional conflict which may have been completely overlooked. If such a patient does have a genuine heart attack, this will increase his anxiety. Naturally he will ask how long it will last and whether it is likely to be permanent. Will it shorten his life? Can he expect to recover with proper treatment? Such questions are quite natural and deserve a favorable answer. With good medical care he will probably recover from his heart attack, but his anxiety will always be somewhat of a problem to him. True cause of anxiety. The true cause of anxiety is often obscure, for it stems from the patient's early childhood when he may have been facing some very unhappy situation. This may have left him with a feeling of helplessness because of rejection by one or both of his parents. Naturally, he tries to forget all such unpleasant memories, but they still lie deeply buried in some unconscious area of his mind. Then, to escape further unpleasant experience, he begins to avoid any situation that reminds him of that first painful experience. Such a reaction may also occur in later life, as in cases of shell shock or complete forgetfulness after a battle. Amnesia is the medical term for this conditions. The 516 Help for Troubled Minds. Individual may not only repress memories of the unpleasant event, but he may even temporarily forget his own identity, including his name, age, family background, and any recollection of the past. If the patient feels that he himself is responsible for the unhappy event, he will also have strong feelings of guilt along with the anxiety. He may then have an unconscious desire for some form of punishment to relieve these feelings of guilt. Such peculiar reactions are often seen in young children who will go out of their way to be punished for some secret misbehavior. These peculiar reactions are also seen in older people. Some will unconsciously transfer these strong guilt feelings to some organ or part of the body, and develop a more acceptable symptom, such as a bad headache, a rapid heart, or pains in the abdomen. Eventually, such a patient may develop high blood pressure, or a peptic ulcer, an irritable colon, bronchial asthma, or some chronic skin condition. All of these conditions have been known to stem from strongly repressed feelings of jealousy or rivalry in the family during the early years of life. Maternal affection 517. How does this come about? From the moment a child is born, he has instinctive needs that can be met only by his mother. When he is hungry or disturbed, he immediately begins to cry. The mother then quickly comes to his aid and relieves his tension and feeling of helplessness. As long as she is present, he is happy and may soon drop off to sleep. When he awake, he is again anxious and apprehensive, but with the mother's constant care, he soon learns not to be afraid. This develops a sense of security in him, so that he gradually loses his feelings of helplessness. During his early years, the comforting presence of his mother means more to him than anything else in the world. No one else can ever take her place. He may tolerate the presence of strangers, but he feels more secure when his mother is nearby. Under her careful training, he will eventually be able to anywhere go and do anything he wishes, secure in the knowledge that he is accepted part of the human family. Those early years are the most important in his whole life, for it is then that the foundations of good mental health are laid. Now let us suppose that mother is tense and irritable and preoccupied with other things, so that her newborn baby does not receive the personal care he so much deserves. He is under a serious handicap right from the start, unless he has a sister or aunt who can supply this maternal affection. Even so, he may still develop a deep feeling of insecurity, but if he is not given the right kind of maternal care, he may grow up filled with fear and anxiety and will no doubt feel that the whole world is against him. So much depends on the atmosphere in the home during the early years of life. Don't frighten your child. Many parents and some older children make the tragic mistakes of frightening a young child, thinking this will help him to grow up tough and able to face life. But he is not ready for such a hostile picture of life. Inwardly he may feel lonely and afraid, and as he grows older he may become cool and hostile to the world. As a young baby he may rebel against his fear-ridden world by developing symptoms of colic, vomiting, diarrhea, or constipation. As a young child grows, he gradually comes to realize that certain parts of his body must be kept under control. During his first year he is mainly concerned about what goes into his mouth. In his second year he is increasingly aware of his bowels. By the third year, he has already discovered certain satisfactions from stimulating his sex organs. By the fourth and fifth years he is already becoming aware of certain differences between his own and the other sex. All of this is perfectly normal. If he lives in a friendly environment, He has a natural desire to please his parents and to be popular with the world around him. But if the home atmosphere is filled with feelings of anger, hate, or jealousy, he will soon be aware that something is wrong, and as a result, he may actually become ill because these strong emotions are interfering with this normal functions of life. Psychosexual development in children 519. Without questions, the greatest cause of anxiety in early life arises from sex. These erotic feelings begin long before the child goes school. He probably discovers them more or less by accident. All young children derive a certain amount of satisfaction by secretly manipulating their sex organs. The child who feels unwanted and neglected may do this more often. How should a parent handle this problem? First, by giving the child a generous portion of his time and affection. He should not frighten a child with foolish tales about losing his mind, for this is never true in a young child. But the fear of such an event may haunt him for the rest of his days, and this is far worse. All children pass through these periods of psychosexual development. It is natural for any child to want to know where babies come from. As parents, we must not be embarrassed when confronted with these simple questions. Nor should we suddenly institute strict taboos or punish the child, for this will only leave him bewildered and inwardly hurt. Such questions do not mean that the child is naughty, bad, or dirty. He is exhibiting a perfectly natural curiosity about the normal functions of life. Parents who react badly when questioned are only revealing their own sense of guilt. It is most important to hold the child's confidence, explaining in simple language the general principles, but reserving details until he is older and more able to understand. Most childhood fears tend to disappear in time. But if parents are very strict and domineering, the child may develop a neurosis because of anxiety. Fear of punishment may then carry over into adult life, and because of intense anxiety the individual may not be able to function normally in marriage. We all have a certain number of these unresolved conflicts or complexes that remain with us all our days. Most of them are not very important, provided we have grown up in a kind and sensible atmosphere. But more serious problems may bring on strong feelings of anxiety that may plague a person for the rest of his life. Many a home has been broken up because of old conflicts within the mind. Later experiences all too often tend to revive these forgotten problems. Almost all nervous illnesses start with some type of anxiety, and each must be handled on an individual basis. Treatment: every nervous patient should be given the benefit of a thorough medical examination to rule out all physical causes. F34. 520 Help for troubled minds. Of disease. Very few of these people are entirely free from bodily ailments. These should be adequately treated, for in this way the patient may also be helped to overcome his nervous problems. However, it is important to remember that his anxiety is an unconscious reaction. Nerve-quieting medicines may bring temporary help, but they are never the complete answer to the problem. Some of the more severe cases may need the guidance of a specialist in psychiatry. Most others will do well by counseling with their family physician, provided he is the kind of doctor who will listen to the problem without passing judgment. Most patients seem to benefit from the opportunity to talk over their problems. The physician has had experience in helping many other people with similar problems, and thus he can guide the patient into a more complete understanding of himself. Resolving the patient's conflicts will often bring peace of mind and lead to better ways of living in the future. However, not all anxious patients really want help. Some neurotic patients will cling desperately to their symptoms and resist any effort to make a change. This in itself reveals the true nature of emotional conflicts. Nervous breakdown. When a person has a nervous breakdown, it means that he can no longer face the world and solve his own problems. Instead of making sensible decisions, he is likely to go all to pieces, often for no apparent reason. Unfortunately, there is no simple solution to any nervous breakdown. It always takes time, perhaps a year or more, before the individual regains his self-control. Relatives and friends must understand this, for no matter how much the patient may wish to snap out of it, he simply cannot do so. Everyone has a breaking point beyond which he cannot safely go. Many people suffer from nervous breakdowns because of undue fatigue. Some are trying to get along without sufficient sleep, eating the wrong type of food, and smoking or drinking alcohol to excess. Overwork may sometimes lead to a nervous breakdown. The only cure for this is sufficient rest, but the patient must understand why he has this urge to attempt too much. There may be some personality defect that should be corrected. Most nervous breakdowns arise from abnormal fear or anxiety, as stated on page 515. Some patients are afraid of dirt, others of nervous breakdown. 521. Crowds, animals, strangers, germs, closed doors, open spaces, high places, bright lights, or darkness. Strange fears may haunt the patient's mind, producing weakness, a rapid heart, or feelings of smothering, or a cold sweat. The more he tries to force himself, the worse he feels. Because of fear, he may lose his appetite and suffer from gastric disturbances and indigestion. In all these cases there is definitely something wrong, though it is usually far different from what the patient suspects. A nervous patient may wake up in the morning with a sore throat. He should stay home, but he decides he must go to work. He has a slight fever, feels dizzy, and his heart begins to pound, but he goes to work in spite of his feelings. Someone may then remark that he looks pale. Suddenly he is afraid. Perhaps a friend of his recently died of a heart ailment. Could he be having a heart attack too? The more he thinks about it, the worse he feels. He is weak and tired and afraid. His physical energy is at a low ebb because he has pushed himself beyond his limits. It doesn't happen overnight. The patient was probably going downhill for some time, owing perhaps to bad habits of living. A nervous breakdown is no accident. There is always a period of excessive worry and emotional strain prior to the illness. Nervous exhaustion often brings strange changes in personality, making one irritable, moody, and depressed. For a time he may be gay, carefree, and excitable before the depression. He may even boast that he can do without sleep. Such behavior should always make a person alert to the possibilities of a nervous breakdown. They are indications that the patient is nearing the limits of his physical and mental reserve powers. Soon he may reach the point of no return where he loses all sense of self-control. Loss of sleep often results in fatigue and quickly impairs a person's normal judgment. The higher centers of the brain are the first to show the effects of overwork and anxiety. From being the life of the party, such a person may become depressed, losing all interest in life and burdened with a sense of impending death. Unreasonable fears now arise to the surface of his mind, causing all kinds of anxiety and distress as well as sensations of acute pain. In the end he loses confidence in himself and may feel he is about to lose his mind, or that he has committed some unpardonable sin. A period of rest enjoyed out in the countryside, away from the crushing worries of business life, will serve as a tonic to many a nerve-frayed executive. The hypochondriac. 523. Treatment. In treating a nervous breakdown, every attempt must be made to uncover the cause. Do not take any advice from amateurs. Some simple medicine, such as Librium, 10 mg 3 or 4 times a day, may help to allay the patient's fears and quiet his anxiety. But, unfortunately, there are no miracle drugs that will cure a nervous breakdown. Modern tranquilizers are often helpful, but only a full understanding of why he is sick will ever bring a patient back to full health and vitality again. This always takes time. Many of these patients will do better in a quiet hospital room where they may be able to discover the real reasons for the breakdown. Once such a person has found the cause of his trouble, it will be easier for him to make the necessary changes and bring himself back into harmony with himself, his family, his friends, and with God. The hypochondriac. The hypochondriac is a person who is always preoccupied with some disease condition, either imaginary or real. He prefers to make his own diagnosis and prescribe his own treatment. Some hypochondriacs just love taking pills and injections, and are always looking for tonics, sedatives, and laxatives of one kind or another. Most of the time they complain of indigestion and lack of proper elimination. They carefully read all the literature on their particular subject, scientific or otherwise, and follow out every suggestion that is offered. But in spite of all their efforts, they usually become weaker and less able to meet the problems of normal living. Their trouble is mostly one of the mind, not of the body. Other hypochondriacs are always complaining of feeling tired and worn out. They wander from one doctor's office to another and are very disappointed when no physical cause can be found for their strange feelings, which are really a form of neurosis. Rarely is an organic cause found. Such troubles are usually due to anxiety, frustration, and discouragement. Going on a rest cure will do no good. In a few cases there may be some problem with the thyroid gland or some other organ. If, after a careful examination, no cause can be found, the trouble is most likely due to some hidden form of anxiety. Such problems can be solved only by finding the cause of anxiety and clearing it up, as suggested on page 515. 524 Help for troubled minds. Obsessive-compulsive disorders. Some neurotic patients demonstrate their anxieties in very strange ways. They will sometimes develop peculiar habit patterns, which they seem to carry out as a form of ritual. They may begin repeating certain meaningless words and thoughts, and this seems to bring a certain amount of relief. But realizing how foolish this appears to others, the patient may try to resist the tendency. This builds up a great deal more anxiety within, and he then finds some temporary relief by once more carrying out the ritual. Such a person may be forever washing his hands, probably as a kind of penance because he wants to remove certain feelings of guilt. But with all this hand washing, the skin may become rough and irritated. A patient of this type is always very punctual. He is likely to be an extreme perfectionist, cleanliness being almost a part of his religion. Obsessive-compulsive patients often do strange things. Extreme cases include kleptomania or the compulsion to steal, and also arson, which is the compulsion to light destructive fires. Such are the more extreme cases of obsessive-compulsive neuroses. More simple forms of ritual may be observed in those who slavishly follow patriotic or religious ceremonies. Investigation shows that such people have usually grown up under the influence of an over-conscientious parent whom the child has never been able to please. Treatment is always difficult because of the lifelong tendencies, some of which may have been inherited. It is advisable to seek expert counsel from a psychiatrist in more extreme cases. Hysteria. Hysteria is another strange type of behavior arising from intense anxiety. It appears in both sexes, but is far more common in young women, most of whom are fussy, meticulous, and overdressed. Here the patient's symptoms would appear to arise from some real disease, but the resemblance is only superficial. Any well-trained doctor can always tell the difference, and so can most observant relatives. But the patient herself is always convinced she has something definitely wrong inside. She does, but it is different from what she suspects. Under severe emotional strain or fright, or perhaps extreme disappointment, the patient may become temporarily disabled in some part of her body. For instance, she may lose the use of her voice. Hysteria 525. And yet have nothing wrong with the larynx or the nerves of speech. She may develop a temporary paralysis in one arm or leg, a condition often seen after some industrial or highway accident. The disability may then continue for a much longer period than would normally be expected from the time of injury, only to clear up quickly after the patient has received proper compensation for the injury. Some patients may suffer from hysterical blindness after some unhappy love affair or business transaction. Yet they have nothing wrong with their nerves of sight. Some young women who unconsciously resent becoming pregnant will develop attacks of hysterical vomiting. Amnesia, or loss of memory, is another hysterical symptom, as outlined on page 515. Sleepwalking is also related to hysteria. Fits and fainting spells are common symptoms of hysteria. Even megrim headaches may sometimes be hysterical in nature. But in all this the patient is quite honest. He is not consciously trying to deceive. His symptoms are quite real to him. Treatment: hysteria often appears so normal that treatment is difficult and disappointing. The patient is not malingering or putting it on. She genuinely believes she is ill, and it is often wiser not to enlighten her too rapidly, or she may develop other more alarming symptoms. The family should just go about their business and generally ignore the patient until he or she gets over the problem. More severe cases may need the advice of an experienced psychiatrist. Problem drinkers. Alcoholism is one of the gravest social problems facing our world today, for it so often brings poverty, crime, business failure, and broken homes. 1 out of every 5 patients admitted to mental hospitals is there because of chronic indulgence in alcohol. A very large number of traffic accidents are also due to alcohol. This is a problem that concerns everyone, those who drink and those who don't. Some alcoholics drink more or less steadily, others drink only when under stress or anxiety. Some drink excessively and destroy themselves rapidly. Others drink more moderately, but the process of self-destruction is still going on. Alcohol acts like other nerve-quieting drugs, and because it is so readily available in most parts of the world, it is all the more dangerous. 526 Help for troubled minds. Effects on the body. Alcohol often destroys the liver, causing hepatic cirrhosis. It produces gastritis or inflammation of the stomach. Its effect upon the brain is even more marked. Large quantities of alcohol will produce the serious condition known as wet brain, in which there is marked swelling and congestion in the tissues covering the brain so that the normal powers of coordination can no longer operate. Alcohol causes the heart become weak and flabby, and then it no longer functions properly. In some people, alcohol produces marked paranoid reactions. The alcoholic may feel he is being persecuted. He may then take revenge on others around him, or he may attempt suicide to escape the accusing voices that result from impaired functions of the brain. He may develop severe symptoms of peripheral neuritis in which the nerves become weakened and deteriorated. His personality may so deteriorate that he becomes shiftless, lazy, and unreliable. But even in such a low state he may still improve, provided he is willing to make the change and leave alcohol alone for the rest of his life. Treatment: first of all, the alcoholic must have a strong desire to stop drinking. He must also admit that in his own strength he cannot do so. He will probably benefit by joining a special group, such as Alcoholics Anonymous. Here he can use his energies in helping others who are in the same situation. He needs a good diet with plenty of fresh fruits and fruit juices. At the same time he should avoid strong condiments, such as pepper, mustard, and chili. He should not smoke, for this may only increase his desire for alcohol. His meals should be well planned, and he should take multivitamin tablets, particularly those containing the B-complex vitamins, and ascorbic acid or vitamin C. Above all, he must develop a strong religious sense, asking for divine help every hour and every day for victory in this greatest battle of his life. Drug addiction. Drug addiction is a sad state of mind and body which may follow the prolonged use of some strong drug or medicine. Not all who take pain-killing drugs will become addicted to them, but they could if they continue to use them over a long period of time. Habit-forming drugs include alcohol, morphine, heroin, dilaudid, opium. The depressed patient 527. And such synthetic drugs as Demerol, pethidine, marijuana, cocaine, and the amphetamines are also widely used today. But the most common drugs are the sedatives, such as phenobarbital and similar sleep-producing drugs. Thousands of people die every year because of barbiturate poisoning, most of these being suicide attempts. Unfortunately, many young people today become addicted to drugs for no other reason than the desire for a thrill, or because someone has dared them to try some drugs such as marijuana or goofballs containing barbiturates and dexedrine. Sometimes an alcoholic is given a narcotic drug to aid in overcoming his addiction to alcohol, but there is danger that he might become dependent on the new drug. All drug addicts are socially maladjusted. Treatment. Proper treatment depends upon the type of drug being used, the age of the patient, and how long he has been addicted to it. Usually the younger the patient, the better the results of treatment. More stubborn cases should be treated in hospital, under the care of a doctor who specializes in this type of therapy. For home care, follow the suggestions on page 526 under treatment for problem thinkers, for the two conditions are very similar. The depressed patient. Patients with nervous problems are either neurotic or psychotic, as outlined on pages 509 and 510. These two groups are fairly well defined. Actually, they have little in common, except in the case of the deeply depressed patient, in which case the distinctions are not so clear. Individuals suffering from the more pronounced types of mental disorder are sometimes said to be insane, but the term insanity is a legal one, not a medical term. An insane person is one who cannot distinguish right from wrong or assume responsibility for his own actions. In the case of a psychotic patient, the whole personality is involved, and he is completely out of touch with the real world around. Not so the neurotic patient. Only a small part of his personality is involved. Psychotic patients often require hospitalization, neurotic patients rarely do unless they have some additional physical problem. Another distinction between these two major groups is that the psychotic patient is usually brought to the doctor by his friends, while the neurotic comes of his own accord. He knows he is sick, and he F31. 528 Help for troubled minds. Usually wants help. Most often he is suffering from a nervous depression. Reactive depression. This is a simple depression or sadness which is usually brought on by some catastrophe or unhappy event, such as losing one's home or business in a fire, or perhaps by the death of some loved one in the family. When something like this happens, most people pass through a few days or weeks of sadness and then try to carry on as best they can. The patient with a reactive depression seems unable to do this. His grief lasts a long time, and he may be disturbed as to be unable to do his normal work. Why is the now so deeply depressed? A careful survey of his early childhood will probably show some real problems. And while such a person may have appeared to be perfectly normal all his life, there may have been times when he felt his whole world was more or less falling apart. In spite of this, he was able to get along somehow, but he always felt somewhat weakened and deprived of the normal satisfactions of life. The recent catastrophe, such as losing his busyness, may have been more than could take the last straw. Psychotherapy or mind treatment is advisable in all cases of reactive depression. It is most important for the patient to gain an insight into why he is so depressed. This will help to prevent further episodes. If he becomes so severely depressed as to contemplate suicide, he should be given a series of electroshock treatments to help him over his depression. Delayed grief reaction. When some loved one dies, it is perfectly natural to weep. Failure to grieve may indicate some personality disturbance that should be corrected. These peculiar mixed or ambivalent feelings are often a sign that all is not well. A normal amount of grief is nature's way of releasing tensions. Abnormal recessions should be discussed with someone who understands the mechanisms of the human mind, so that a more normal response will develop. This may help to avert a complete mental breakdown in future. Attempted suicide. Some people threaten to commit suicide just to see how the family will react. They may never actually carry it out, but such threats should always be taken seriously, for they have a troubled mind. Also, the time may come when they may so convinced enough to carry it out. Remember, the person in sadness is always depressed. Strangely, the greatest risk is moodiness. 529. When he appears to take a turn for the better. This may be the moment when he plans to end his life. Treatment. Mild depressions can often be relieved by tranquilizing drugs, such as chlorpromazine, 25 to 50 mg, every 4 to 6 hours as needed. More severe depressions may require electroshock treatments. Be sure to remove all knives and other cutting instruments from the environment of the individual and all ropes, neckties, stockings, and anything that he can use to strange himself. Some depressed patients have managed to hang themselves by tearing the bed sheets in pieces and tying them together as ropes. Also be sure to remove all harmful drugs and chemicals. Never leave a depressed patient alone, not even for a moment. Far too many people died from suicide when with proper treatment they might have been rescued and given a chance to live a normal life once more. Manic depressive or moody people. Some people are unusually bright and witty. They are often the life of the party, make friends quickly, and are perfectly at ease. They seem to have boundless energy and are often highly successful in business. But these breezy, happy-go-lucky people often show marked changes of mood. After a period of tense excitement and brilliant success, they may descend into deep despondency and gloom. This is what doctors call a manic-depressive psychosis, a peculiar mental disorder that has been recognized for thousands of years. Not all manic-depressive patients go to extremes. Some are more easily depressed, others are often elated. Some swing to both extremes. One day they are on top of the world, able to do anything they turn their hand to. The next time you see them they are in the depths of despair, unable to do anything at all. These are the crazy people who often get things done in the world. During the manic or excitable stage they are overactive and ceaselessly on the move. They seem to require much less sleep than other people. They think more rapidly than the ordinary person, but their ideas often lack balance and directions. As these feelings of excitement build up, they finally reach the euphoric talkative stage, and may carry on with clowning performance that may easily be mistaken for signs of happiness. Such actions are never normal. They indicate a severe illness, which unless checked, will lead on to an exhausting state of delirium. Following this the patient may descend into a severely depressed state, pacing the floor, wringing his hands, and blaming himself for all the problems of life. He is deeply suicidal and should be watched every minute, as suggested on page 529. A manic-depressed person may go through these peculiar cycles once or twice in his life, or perhaps more. Melancholia and split mind 531. Frequently, often riding the crest of the wave and then dropping down into the deepest gloom. During the active phase he may create marvelous works of art or he may become a great success in business, only to lose everything during his depression. Treatment: unfortunately, there is no cure for this condition, but much can be done to help the patient. Suitable tranquilizing drugs will help to control his agitation and keep him within normal bounds. During the depressed phase of the illness, he may need a few electroshock treatments. Every precaution must be taken against suicide by following the suggestions outlined on page 529. Involutional melancholia. Involutional melancholia is a depression that generally comes on during later life. The patient has feelings of impending disaster and may be too depressed even to eat or speak. This is really an agitated depression, marked by anxiety and restlessness. These patients will often pace the floor, pull their hair, wring their hands. They frequently suffer from sleeplessness and loss of appetite. They have false notions about their bodies, and may believe their blood is turning to water, or that their stomachs are filled with concrete. They suffer from headaches and strong guilt feelings. Such people should be treated in hospital. Almost all of them will benefit from electroshock treatments. They should also be given some suitable tranquilizer, such as Liberum, 10 mg every 4 to 6 hours, to tide them over the worst of their depression. Most of them recover well with proper treatment and care. Some older people may suffer from a paranoid type of melancholia or involutional psychosis. These folk have all the symptoms mentioned above, plus some of the delusions seen in paranoid schizophrenia. Many of them are shy, introverted personalities, unable to meet the stress and strain of middle life. Here again electroshock treatment is often a life-saving technique. If this fails, a lobotomy, brain operation, may be indicated. With proper treatment, most of these patients will eventually make a fair recovery. Schizophrenia or split mind. Schizophrenia, a term meaning split mind, also known as dementia praecox, is a very serious form of mental illness. Most often, 532 help for troubled minds. It strikes in the earlier years of life. The true cause of this is not known. Schizophrenic patients are always a little odd in their reactions. Where the normal person may feel like weeping, the schizophrenic either giggles or shows no outward expression. On the other hand, he may cry when others laugh. He fluctuates from one extreme to another. One moment he may be full of affection, the next he is all anger and resentment. His behavior is completely unpredictable. He may babble on about nothing, then suddenly withdraw from the world and speak to no one for weeks at a time. Such are the peculiarities of this disease. There are 4 main types of schizophrenia. They are not sharply divided but tend to blend into one another. Simple schizophrenia usually begins during late adolescence. These patients appear careless and apathetic and may lapse into juvenile delinquency or prostitution. Most beatniks probably belong to this group. The patient has an odd appearance and his actions are peculiar. He has a silly smile on his face, lives in a world to himself, and tends to withdraw from normal associations with others. The hebephrenic patient is even more odd. His illness generally begins at an early age and is characterized by fits of silly laughing. He often assumes a peculiar facial expression, and insists on wearing the strangest combinations of colors. All his ideas are weird and absurd, and he soon loses touch with the real world around him. Such patients should be treated in a proper psychiatric institution. Catatonic schizophrenia is another form of this disease. It comes on later in life, usually in the middle 30s, and may follow some intense emotional experience or disappointment. The patient assumes a negative attitude and may refuse to carry out the normal activities of life, such as bathing, eating, and talking. He suffers from delusions and hallucinations, hears voices, and sees people who are not present. At times he will offer no resistance, but if placed in a certain position will remain there for long periods of time. Strange as it may seem, under proper treatment the outlook for this condition is often better than for the other types of schizophrenia. Paranoid schizophrenia, as noted on page 511, is the most dangerous form of this disease. Here the patient has a well-functioning intellect. He sees and hears all that is going on around him, but unfortunately he has a persecution complex and suffers from delusions and strong feelings of jealousy. He is very suspicious of others. Treatment for schizophrenia 533. Around him. Much of the time he may appear quite normal. But at any moment his smoldering resentments may come to the surface, and he will not hesitate to injure anyone if he thinks that person has it in for him. He may even commit murder. All too often relatives and friends of the paranoid schizophrenic patient fail to recognize the danger until it is too late. Because they are anxious to give him the benefit of the doubt, they refuse to see the peculiarities in his mental makeup. He's very tricky and watches every move. He has a remarkable memory of names, dates, and events. He makes use of all these in an attempt to get even with the world, and especially with anyone whom he believes to be his enemy. Treatment: tranquilizing drugs, such as chlorpromazine, 50 to 100 mg 3 or 4 times a day, and reserpine are widely used today, particularly in patients who are excited or disturbed. These and similar medicines help to relieve the emotional tensions and allow the patient to make a better adjustment to the world around him. Another useful treatment is electric shock therapy. The patient is placed on a treatment table and given an injection of some suitable short-acting anesthetic. As soon as he falls asleep, electrodes are applied to the sides of his head and a carefully controlled electric current is passed through his brain. Electroshock treatment is not expensive. It can even be given to elderly patients without any danger. Patients who do not respond to this may do well under insulin shock therapy. Failing this, the patient may need a prefrontal lobotomy. Psychotherapy and group therapy are also useful in treating these patients, but the healing process cannot be hurried. It takes time for a disturbed mind to find its way back to reality. Any form of schizophrenia is serious, but most patients will benefit when given the proper care under the guidance of a qualified doctor. Like most heart and diabetic patients, schizophrenic patients cannot be cured, but they can be greatly helped through the worst stages of their disease. After a full course of treatment, many of them can return to society and carry on their normal work. This is particularly true of the catatonic and paranoid types of schizophrenia. Developing a cheerful outlook. In all these different forms of mental illness, it is most important to develop a happy outlook on life. Many patients act like spoiled children. They feel deeply hurt when they cannot get their own way all the time. Mature people never act like pampered children. Things cannot always go the way we would desire. We must learn to work in harmony with others, in spite of our different points of view. It is so easy to make mistakes that raise tensions within us, leaving the mind troubled and distressed. Laughter and tears are the best antidotes for failure. These are nature's ways of releasing our inner tensions and bringing us back to a more normal way of life. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is for a depressed person to either laugh or cry? He may make an attempt, but it is never genuine, probably because he is so obsessed. A healthy outlook. 535. With his own feelings of frustration. If he is of a suspicious nature, he is busy trying to measure the motives of those around him. Many of these nervous people have memories like tape recorders. They never forget a detail. Every unhappy scene is minutely observed and carefully memorized, while here and there a few extra touches are added. These typical paranoid traits often indicate a far more severe underlying mental illness. Such people need professional help. They should not try to follow advice from amateurs. A good memory is a wonderful thing, but there are times when it is more important to forget. This is not always easy, especially if we happen to be the injured party. But if we are ever to really enjoy good health, there may be some things we should forget. Most neurotic people self-centered. Are not unnatural. We are all a bit that many way. But neurotic people use their various symptoms, such as nervous vomiting, megrim headaches, and palpitation, to get their own way. They may not always realize what they are doing, but they often force the rest of the family to conform to their wishes. In the end, no one is happy, everyone is miserable. Mature men and women are never like this. They are always busy helping other people, and by doing so, they have already gone a long way toward really successful living. One of the most valuable assets in life is a good sense of humor. If we will only learn to laugh and take ourselves less seriously, we can usually overcome our most difficult handicaps. Things cannot always go the way we would like, but even this may be a real advantage in the end. We still have much to be thankful for, in spite of occasional setbacks. The thorns of disappointment are often accompanied by roses of opportunity and challenge. So let us dwell on the happier side of life. A spirit of gratitude will do much to restore both mind and body. Make friends with the great writers of the past. The reading of good books will help us to forget our disappointments and failures and our thwarted ambitions. Try to develop a firm faith in the future. In spite of all the chaos in the world, God still has his hands on the helm, not only in the